I know you like to prepare speeches, so there you go. you'll get cued. But which of these do I say? All three of the above? Yeah. You say all three? Yeah. Yeah.
You can handle it.
Yeah, I think so. I think you've got the talent.
I've been here before.
Yeah, I remember.
Hello, Paul. How are you?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
This is a habit.
Yeah.
I know it's like university. Everybody house of worship.
That was the room.
No, well, he took this. Troublemaker. No one will ask me a question. I will at some point ask you guys to come join me. Yeah, I'll come with you. You're all set. Yeah. All three, right? You choose? You say all three? I think so. I haven't looked. I wrote it once upon a time.
Okay. First, before I even begin with anything, I want to thank you all for coming out. We live in challenging times, public health and other reasons, and it's wonderful to see everybody here. It's our first in-person commemoration of Kristallnacht in over 2 years, and your presence means a lot to everyone involved. So I want to welcome you to this commemoration. My name is Misha Menzer, and I'm a member of the Victoria Shoah Project. I want to begin by recognizing and acknowledging with great respect that we're on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen peoples, now referred to as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. They have a historic connection to these lands, and that continues. There's lots that can be done, but I encourage each of you to learn more and truly be an active part of reconciliation, because it's not just up to government or leadership, it's up to every one of us. The other thing I'd like to do is, last night we lost a cherished member of our community here at Congregation Emanu-El. And it's not part of Kristallnacht program, but this was her spiritual home, it's our spiritual home, and she was a valued member of our community, a woman called Jen Carmona. So I'd just like to take a moment to hold her and her family in our hearts at this difficult time. So in Jewish tradition, our names often tell of the family history. My first name, Misha, honors my paternal grandfather, who lived his whole life in a small shtetler village in Bukovina called Stroschnitz. His family had been there for countless generations and were very well respected in the town. My grandfather died before the war and was spared the pain of deportation or learning of the murder of his daughter and son-in-law by the Nazis. My middle name, Jacob, or Yaakov, honors my mother's brother, who was born in Suceava, another shtetl close to my father's family. Yaakov was a history professor in a town called Sigid, and he was married with a teenage daughter when the war broke out. His family, together with my grandfather, my parents, and many other members of the family, were deported to Bershat in the Ukraine in December 1941. Bershat was a ghetto camp, bursting to the seams with Jews, deportees, and was characterized by typhoid, starvation, and random killings by the guards. Yaakov and my grandfather died soon after the deportation and left his wife and young daughter with my parents. They miraculously survived 2.5 years of harsh years in the camp. Yaakov and I never met my grandparents or Yaakov or many of my European family, and nothing remains to mark my family's long history in Bukovina. I tell you briefly about my family to personalize the bare statistics of 6 million Jews killed in the Shoah and many millions whose lives were changed forever. These were real people, real families, and the little piece that I can do is tell you a little bit about mine. Tonight we commemorate Kristallnacht. I was trying to figure out what commemoration really means. So of course I went to, not Google, I'm old school, to the dictionaries. And commemoration is described as a public ceremony to remember an important event and show respect. So what's remembrance about? Well, one aspect of our remembrance tonight will be the lighting of 6 candles in memory of the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Shoah. But I would ask you, while holding these souls in your heart, please think of the survivors. Some of the candle lighters and tonight's attendees are the descendants of these survivors and living testimony of the heroism of survivors. A second aspect of commemoration is to learn. Tonight, Professor Kristen Simmons will bring insights into Kristallnacht and what it foreshadowed. For me, at its core, was the normalizing of hatred against a group that was the other, in this case, the Jews. This was done so that the atrocities that followed could be seen as necessary and orderly. But let's be clear, hatred is not normal, and no contortions of history can justify it. Today, almost 80 years later, the survivors are few, and even children of survivors, such as myself, who heard direct witness accounts, are now getting older. So how do we tell their stories to a new generation? I would suggest that new and creative methods are needed. Many are found right here in Victoria through plays, art, music, and innovative teaching and exhibits. Professor Helga Thorsen of UVic designed one such means in her course, Stories of the Holocaust, pairing a student with a survivor or their descendant to tell their family story through a variety of ways. It's a remarkable online digital exhibit available to be seen. Simply Google UVic Stories of the Holocaust. Tonight, survivor Julius Maslovat and UVic student Ireland Good will describe their experience in this project. I urge you to follow it up as well. A second example of new ways to teach of the Holocaust is the recently published graphic novel, But I Live. This was edited by Charlotte Chalier, also of UVic, where 3 different stories of survival with images created by talented artists are told in a format easily accessible to today's young people who are very familiar with graphic novels. A third example is the play Survivors, with its accompanying teacher's guide, designed for middle and high school students that will be presented to schools in Victoria this fall with a few public performances. This production is a collaboration between the Victoria Shoah Project and Bima Productions. These and more initiatives will help ensure that modern generations, young and old, understand the Shoah and its origins. Hatred shows no favorites. Nazism was primarily directed at the Jews. However, it also targeted other groups such as the Roma, persons with disabilities, and what we now describe in modern terms as the LGBT community. While the Shoah was unique, the hatred that underlied it is not. We have seen many examples in history of atrocities towards a group of peoples based on religions, race, political beliefs, or sexual orientation. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we respond to hatred? When do we respond, and where should we respond? The answer should be obvious. We respond by all means, now and everywhere hatred is found. The Statistics Canada report in August this year stated there were 3,360 police reported hate crimes in 2021. This represents a 27% increase from the previous year. And as in the past, Jewish Canadians were the most targeted group, with a dramatically disproportionate share of the hate crimes. BC is not immune to this frightening trend. One only needs to look no farther than Monday's headlines on Times Colonist, which read, Victoria Police on scene after anti-Semitic threat at Jewish Films Festival. It is real and it is dangerous, and we all need to pay attention to it and act. We can't be numbed by these statistics or the daily dark news from around the world. Respectful commemoration and knowledge is important. However, I suggest action is essential. There's a public aspect to commemoration that especially needs to be highlighted. There is a power in speaking out in public and in public action, and that power is highlighted when we see our leaders, such as we see this evening from the political world, the multi-faith world, the law enforcement world, all standing here together to speak out. In this day, so much hatred is fostered and grows in the dark, in secret websites and platforms. This needs to be exposed and stopped. Silence is not an option. A powerful part of our evening this evening will be the reading by the community leaders of the Pledge of Mutual Respect and Support, which commits us to stand together against racism, discrimination against any peoples in our community. Racism and anti-Semitism is not just an attack on a group, it's an attack on humanity. And all people of good mind must stand together, speak out, and act forcefully. With these words, I welcome you to tonight's commemoration of Kristallnacht in its fullest sense. And I will invite Professor Kristen Semmens to come up now and provide some thoughts.
Thank you, Misha, and very nice to see your faces again after an absence of a very long time. Although Zoom was a fairly good substitute for a little while. As Misha said, my name is Kristen Semmens, and I am an associate professor in the Department of History at the University of Victoria. And the Victoria Shoah Project has invited me here tonight to trace how Germany moved towards Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, that appalling nationwide pogrom unleashed by the Nazi regime against Jews in Germany, Austria, and parts of Czechoslovakia on November 9th and 10th, 1938. I am very honored to take up this task. Each year, I try to connect my talk to the chosen theme of the annual commemoration here at Congregation Emanu-El. And this year, our working theme was Kristallnacht, a remembrance with relevance for today. Now, clearly, you don't have to convince a historian that remembering the past is relevant to today. But the story of how Germany moved towards horrific open violence under the Nazis resonates especially strongly with us today, since it includes increasing polarization, societal division, threats to democracy, a rise in extremist far-right thinking, deepening systemic racism, and more. Unfortunately, all of this does have meaning currently. However, there is another story, one that is equally relevant for our present times, that I want to tell tonight. This story moves beyond what was done to the victims, the Jews of Greater Germany, and instead highlights their responses, and indeed how they resisted the repression. How the persecuted managed to challenge a system stacked against them is vitally important when we consider how to fight and right the wrongs of our world today. Some of the strategies and actions that Jewish Germans adopted to defy Hitler were unique to them. Others they shared with other outsiders: disabled Germans, Sinti and Roma Germans, Black Germans, homosexual and gay Germans, Germans who broke the Nazis' supposed political, social, and racial norms. In speaking about resistance by the persecuted in the Hitler dictatorship, we must redefine the concept. So resistance needs to mean something a little bit different when we're talking about that among the persecuted, because their possibilities for action were so limited and the penalties for anti-Nazi activity among them were so harsh. So my working definition, and of course I draw on other scholars, this isn't my definition alone, but my working definition for what counts as active resistance by those who were most oppressed, repressed, and victimized under the swastika is as follows. Any individual or group action in opposition to known laws, deeds, or intentions of the Nazis and their collaborators, whether successful or unsuccessful. So this therefore comprises a wide range of defiant acts, including varieties of cultural and spiritual resistance, actions that attempted to limit or end the oppressor's power, and strategies to reduce suffering and make survival possible. And that final sentence is worth repeating, because survival itself resisted the Nazis' ultimate intentions. Keeping that definition of resistance in mind, you're now wondering when I'm going to get to what I was here invited to do, but keeping that definition of resistance in mind, let me now turn to how Germany moved towards Kristallnacht and how the Jews resisted their persecution at every stage. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler, the head of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis, became Chancellor of Germany. Amid the Great Depression, after a series of political, social, and economic crises since the defeat in the First World War 14 years earlier, the German population turned increasingly towards Hitler. They expected him to save the country from chaos, from communists, from the hated Treaty of Versailles, and crucially, to save them from those whom many blamed for their current circumstances, the Jews. The new Nazi government unleashed an immediate cascade of anti-Semitic actions, legislation, and violence in the months that followed. One of the best known of these was the nationwide boycott that took place on the 1st of April, 1933. It was organized by Nazi Party functionaries, and it was a boycott of shops, businesses, and professional practices that were owned by Jewish Germans. Now, we've all likely seen images of the boycott. Even if you don't remember having seen them, I believe that these are familiar images to many of us. Brown-shirted stormtroopers with signs raised saying, "Germans do not buy from Jews," barring entry to stores. Those images are familiar to many of us. But perhaps less familiar might be the photograph of a Jewish veteran of the First World War who donned his military medals that day and stood outside his store to protest the Nazis' attacks on his Germanness, something of which he, like very many Jewish veterans, was immensely proud. This event, though, made this war veteran realize that in the eyes of the new Nazi state, as another war veteran later put it, he was German no more. And yet he had stood there in an attempt to defy that attack. That same month, the Nazi regime passed the civil service law, which banned all so-called non-Aryans, Jews for the most part, from working in any position paid by the state. Thousands of Jewish Germans were dismissed from their jobs. Impoverishment and destitution threatened. Yet Jews did not submit without a fight. They sent hundreds of petitions to authorities pleading for exemptions or simply to protest the injustice of this racist legislation. These petitions provide incredible evidence of resistance, and sometimes, at least in the short term, they were even successful. 2 years later, in 1935, the regime passed the Nuremberg Laws, further clarifying whom it considered to be German and who was not. Non-Aryans and Aryans, Jews and non-Jews, were prohibited from marrying one another, and Jews, Sinti and Roma Germans, and Black Germans were demoted from citizens of the state to subjects of it. A flood of Jews not wanted here signs sprang up, showing how many ordinary Germans embraced, or at least did not actively oppose, the Nazis' anti-Semitic prejudices and their definition of nationality. Many Jews now felt increasingly isolated and cut off from their neighbors, friends, and acquaintances. Looking back, one survivor of the Shoah recalled how his friends hardly left their houses after the Nuremberg laws, so that, he said, they would not have to keep experiencing how people avoided them. They were, he said, lonely. But other Jewish Germans, however, responded with outright defiance. Hearts pounding with fears of getting caught, they went to cinemas that banned them. They swam at public pools that officially denied their entry. They ate at restaurants where they were not officially welcome. One of my favorite photographs displaying this resilient opposition to what had become the new normal in Germany shows a woman, whom we know to be Jewish, sitting proudly on a bench. And on that bench was a sign that said, "Only for Aryans." By posing for this photograph, she was intentionally thumbing her nose at Nazi segregationist goals. But breaking the Nuremberg laws could lead to a concentration camp. And so, while such oppositional behaviors did continue, only a minority, understandably, dared to risk undertaking them. By 1938, with Nazi Germany's annexation of Austria and the Czech Sudetenland, the persecution of Jews intensified dramatically. They now had to register all assets and property. Access to their own bank accounts was restricted. Their businesses were so-called Aryanized, taken over by non-Jewish Germans. They could no longer practice certain trades. Doctors and lawyers lost their licenses, apart from a few still allowed to serve Jewish patients and clients. Petitions to the authorities streamed in, written by increasingly desperate Jews across the ever-expanding country. The vast majority were, not surprisingly, unsuccessful, but they nonetheless took up time, resources, and staff power from within a regime that was unexpectedly attuned to popular sentiment. Such petitions were thus not always immediately rejected out of hand. And so, in slowing the bureaucratic machinery of persecution, Jews challenged Nazi intentions, and they attempted to limit Nazi power. This, in my mind, was resistance. Some Jews refused to add the names Sarah and Israel, as was made mandatory in August 1938, when Jews had to put their signatures on official documents. Others found increasingly illegal ways to bypass the Nazis' policies of dispossession and were able to smuggle some of their wealth and valuables out of the country. That is, when they were able to find a place to which to flee. On November 9th, 1938, the Nazis' persecution took more physical forms in the broken glass lining Germany's streets, in the bruised and broken bodies of assaulted Jews, and the columns of men marched off to concentration camps. There are some cases, during Kristallnacht, in which Jews fought back physically against their attackers. More frequently, female relatives of the arrested men gathered outside police precincts and wrote letters to Gestapo offices pleading for their loved ones' release. Tonight, we remember the unimaginable violence of Kristallnacht, but so too should we recall the ways in which its targets resisted. As the Second World War and later the Final Solution began, Jews, and indeed all of the Nazis' victims, continued to oppose repression, persecution, and mass murder. When their very lives were threatened, Jews' ongoing courageous efforts merely to survive and to ensure their culture and religion also survived, challenge any notion of meek submission to Nazi power. The story of how Germany moved towards Kristallnacht and the responses by Jews at every stage are pertinent today. Oppressed groups continue today to resist in a variety of forms. Their actions are courageous and resilient. Yet without support from those not facing similar oppression, resistance by the victims alone cannot achieve far-going systemic change. Speaking against anti-Semitism cannot therefore be left solely to Jews. And I'm very honored, therefore, to be here tonight and to speak out against it with your community. To oppose wrongs, as Misha had said, we need to stand together. The story of Kristallnacht reminds us of what can happen when we do not, which makes our remembrance of this event so incredibly relevant today.
We're now going to move to the commemoration aspect of lighting candles. And there will be 6 candles lit, 1 candle in memory of each of the 6 million Jews who were killed in the war, and the final candle will be a candle of hope. So I will call up the individual candle lighters, and perhaps Elisheva will help them if they. The candle will be lit by Nathan Kellerstein, who dedicates the candle lighting to his to his grandmother and great aunt Necha, Batya, and Svea Kellerstein, who all died in the Holocaust. The second candle will be lit by Edith Matush, who will honor her aunt and uncle Fanny and Bernard Weiss, who jumped to their death when Hitler annexed Austria. The third candle will be lit by Isa Milman in honor of her grandmothers, Esther Leah Milman and Elena Devchuk. Next, I would ask Ilana Stenger Ross to come up, and she'll be lighting a candle in memory of her great-grandparents Beryl and Kaya Rothfeld. She should be joined by her children. The fifth candle will be lit by Noah Marnin Gilad for her grandparents Yoshua and Lily Moskowitz, and Yoel and Sarah Gilad and their families. And the sixth candle will be lit by Charlotte Chalier in memory of her grandmother, Charolta Mogan. prayer these 6 million be blessed and life continue. There's a seventh candle, however, and the world always contains hope. And I would invite Premier John Morgan and the youth of Congregation Emanu-El to light this candle with a view to hope for the future.
שימות משהו ממני, משהו ממני ימות איתך, ימות איתך, כשתמות משהו ממך בי, משהו ממך בי ימות איתך, ימות איתך, כי כולנו, כן כולנו, כולנו רקמה אנושית אחת חיה, ואם אחד מאיתנו הולך ועמנו, משהו מת בנו, משהו נשאר איתו. אם נדע איך להרגיע, איך להרגיע את האיבה, אם רק נדע, אם נדע, אם נדע להשקיט את זרמנו על אף חלבוננו לומר סליחה, אם נדע להתחיל מההתחלה, כי כולנו, כן כולנו, כולנו רקמה אנושית אחת חיה, ואם אחד מאיתנו הולך מימנו, משהו מת בנו, משהו נשאר איתו, נשאר איתו.
The words to that beautiful song are in your program, if you want to see what the translation of that beautiful Hebrew song says. And now I'd like to invite Julius Maslovat from Ireland Good to come up and tell you about their involvement in the project a few days ago.
My name is Julius Maslovat.
My name is Ireland Good.
I'm a second year MA student in public history at UVic, and I am currently working on my thesis project, which takes my knowledge of the 1930s and applies it to the Historic House Museum where I work. But my connection to Holocaust studies is ongoing. In the spring of 2021, Stories of the Holocaust, Local Memory and Transmission, an online exhibit looking at diverse stories of the Holocaust, was launched. The 10 students in the course each worked with a local Holocaust survivor or descendant of a survivor to tell their stories and put them in a format that we could share with the public. Each section of the exhibit presented the stories in unique ways. We have bookmarks that we will be handing out with a link to the exhibit, and I encourage you all to look at it. For the project, Julius and I focused on the research process for his story, and through audio, visual elements, we succeeded.
What did it mean for you to be working with him?
I was in my first year of my undergrad when I first heard you speak, and it really resonated with me. It was actually one of the reasons that I participated in the Eyewitness Field School, which was a 3-week-long course through Europe that focused on Holocaust memory and memorialization. And from then, I became involved in Holocaust studies. So to work with you on this exhibit was like a full circle. It meant a lot to me to get to work closely with the person who, without knowing it, set me on my academic path. More than this, it was important for me to learn firsthand a Holocaust survivor's story more than reading it in a book or watching a documentary. There is something so important that a firsthand education brings, that talking with someone can make you understand on a deeper level. Not to mention, I was able to see your documents, which is every historian's greatest pleasure. What did it mean for you to work on this exhibit with me?
As a survivor of 2 concentration camps, I have a responsibility. I have given numerous talks to small groups and people about my experiences, but this gave me an opportunity to address, in a different format, a larger and different group of people. Working one-on-one with you also gave me the opportunity to go into more details in my answers. Your questions gave me insights as to the sort of questions you had. We all need to be aware of the consequences of how hate can destroy. Why are you interested in studying the Holocaust?
When I first started studying the Holocaust in my undergrad, I was really searching to answer the question of how human beings could do such horrific acts to other human beings. In school, as early as kindergarten, we are taught to share with and care for one another. So how is it that we continue to hate? As you mentioned, hate can destroy. Now, after finishing my undergrad and entering my master's, I want to continue working in and with this subject matter because I want to continue to learn and to educate myself on how hate can occur anywhere, at any time, and by anyone. This being the commemoration for the November 9th pogrom, or also known as Kristallnacht, why do you feel it is important to talk here tonight?
You just heard a historical background of Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht turned out to be just the indicator of the horrors to come. That, of course, happened a long time ago, and nothing like that could happen again. Or could it? And is it? Remember, the events of Kristallnacht is even more important today than it was in the past, and should act as a warning to all of us. Since then, the atrocities committed by governments have not only been in Kosovo, Cambodia, Rwanda, South Africa, US, but also here in Canada, when you consider how we treated First Nations people and the children in the residential schools. Anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-Latino, anti-First Nations, and in general, anti-other incidents have increased dramatically worldwide. We are now seeing governments in Poland, Hungary, shift their policies to be more in tune with the fascist ideologies, suppressing human rights. Extreme right-wing parties have gained a strong foothold in elections in France, Brazil, Italy, Israel, and even in Sweden, the radical far-right parliamentary parties have become influential. Russia has attacked the sovereign Ukraine and annexed part of it. Judges are appointed depending on their political ideologies, and now people are embracing hate-filled ideologies in local and school board elections. Does not all this echo the European situation of the 1930s? Or is it just a passing phase that will disappear by itself? It didn't do so in 1938. Kristallnacht was the wake-up call that the world chose to ignore that led to the Holocaust. When we and our leaders turn a blind eye to atrocities and human rights abuses, we are doing so at our own peril. How do you hope to make use of what you have learned through this project to further Holocaust education?
I think it is important for us in this new generation to hear these stories and to share them with people. We need to take on the responsibility of trying to learn from these individuals and to stop hate whenever we see it, because it continues to occur in our world. All I can hope for myself is to use my relationship with you and my education in this field to make a better world. There is a lot I plan to do that I have learned from this project to further Holocaust education. Primarily, I hope to be able to teach where I can and volunteer with different organizations. Currently, I'm volunteering for the Survivors Project, which has allowed me to lend my historical knowledge on the Holocaust to others. I also hope that my experiences will resonate with others to do similarly and to educate themselves. I do know, however, that my own Holocaust education is still ongoing, and I have a lot to learn. Injustices in anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and more, as has been mentioned, continue to occur. And what I know is only the start of what I could do in the future to stop hate from spreading. My relationship with you during this project has been the first step in this journey for me. Do you see any positive results with Holocaust education?
I recently visited Germany, and after a long flight and delays and adjusting to jet lag, I finally came to a long lineup at the passport control. The young female official there asked me the usual questions of how long are you staying and the purpose of my visit. When I replied that I had been invited to talk to high school students at the memorial in Bergen-Belsen, she asked me if I had a personal connection to it. When I said that I had been a prisoner there, she said twice, with all sincerity, "I am sorry." She was aware of the collective responsibility of today's German people. I am sure that this had not been part of her training, but an expression of how she felt. These words became the most memorable part of this trip. This very short conversation with young German officials confirmed to me that Holocaust education is vitally important and worthwhile. It encourages me to speak out to anyone about my experiences for as long as I can.
Thank you, Julius. I just want to just share a couple of words from my heart, which is, I've been standing here for a lot of years at Kristallnacht, and commemoration never felt so poignant to me as it does now. I don't think I've lived through a time in my life, I've been a few decades on this planet, that I've never had the worry. I've always felt that those who define themselves, people who are Jewish, my congregants, people who connect with me, who find their Jewish identity through anti-Semitism, is always something that made me very, very sad. I've always wanted my children and the children of my congregation and all my congregants to feel Jewish from a sense of joy. And that sense that the hate that's out there that seems to be growing, and I think we all sense that sort of sense of pending doom that's out there, whether it's from climate change, which is causing massive migration and changes in all of our lives, and that sense of fear that so many have, and how that comes out in anti-Semitism. And I think, Julius, you mentioned so many of those pieces of what's happening in our planet and why we need to be careful and why we need to stay vigilant. You know, the other day I was on Czech television, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like it was important to speak when I was asked to speak about anti-Semitism. My wife got into work, and my wife, Rayanne, may be the only person at the health clinic here in Victoria who is Jewish, and people came up to her, like she said, it was like hug a Jew day, right? They were just wanting to come and hug her, which had a certain power. But people are often asking me, what can I do? What is there to do? What is the action? When we say we need to take action, what are we really saying? I can only think of two things right now. One is for those of us who come from places of being minorities and from profound minorities, we know what it feels to have microaggressions. We know what it feels to have slights, whether it's Islamophobia, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's clear-on, head-on racism. We know what that's like. And what's really hurts is when it happens and others of the majority culture don't stand up. They don't stand up and say, not here, not in our community, not around us. This is not who we are. It's that sense of indifference that really stings. So for one, I think that if we want to have action, one of it is never being indifferent, staying sensitive, and never being afraid to encounter. There's all kinds of ways to encounter, and it doesn't need to be aggressive and hurtful. That's number one. I think the second piece is that we live in a world and in a system and a society that was kind of built on all different kinds of racism, right? If you think about it, in the 1970s, First Nations folk couldn't ride on the top deck of the ferries in our own province. Maybe it was before the 70s, maybe it was the 60s and 50s. But my children, when I told them that, they said, I didn't learn about that in school. Right? It's easy to learn about segregation in the United States, but not in our own homes. And not to think about the own sense of those voices within us of fear, those voices within us of internalized racism, internalized anti-Semitism, even amongst us as Jews, the voices of anti-Semitism that are inside us as well. We need to be able to hear them and to know them, to acknowledge them, and to say, whoa, I need to change that. I need to do better. I need to raise my own consciousness. I think those are the actions that we can do that begin to make a difference. And I think that the fact that you all came out tonight really makes a difference. It's a little bit crazy that we had to have all of this police presence this year. And it was kind of amazing because the constable I've been working with, Carrie Cochran from Vic PD, she said to me, you know, I'd like to place some police cars and police presence outside. I think it's an important deterrent. And she said, but I know that we weren't the good guys in 1938. And I don't want to trigger any of the people in your community. And I said, all you're triggering for me is gratitude, that I feel like we're seen and cared for and connected in our community. You know, Isa, who came and wrote a poem around 2003 when we hung a Star of David on our new building. Because so many of our elders in the community came to me and they said, Rabbi Harry, is it safe for us to do that? Because they thought that there was safety in hiding. My answer has always been, safety is knowing others and being known. That's about safety. Safety is about standing together in real solidarity. So with that, I want to invite all of my fellow clergy, all of the elected leaders and others in our community to come join me. Come on up on the bima. It's been too long since we've been able to do this. And those of you, if you can pull out your pledge of mutual respect and support. Now, I wrote this a long time ago, and I think if I were to write it again, I would want it to have that sense of not just a sense of tolerance, but a real sense of celebrating one another as well. It's always good that I'm small, right? Because people can all stand behind me. I don't have to go to the side. Okay. So let's all of us, let's fill up this whole sanctuary with these words, because I think that they're words that I think we need to hang on to. Silence in the face of injustice is to agree with the ones who perpetrate injustices. Never will we stand by to allow expressions of racism, xenophobia, or discrimination against any peoples in our community. We will do our utmost to encourage meaningful dialogue and positive action to foster understanding among diverse groups based on mutual respect.
I now ask Robert Oppenheimer of our Victoria Shoah group to lead us in the Kaddish of the camps, and Robert will give you a brief explanation of this prayer.
Good evening, everyone. In Jewish tradition, the Mourner's Kaddish is recited in memory of a close relative. In reciting the Kaddish of the camps and ghettos together, we will expand our definition of family to include all those who died in the Shoah, including Jews, resistors, and others targeted for their ethnicity, disabilities, sexual preferences, or political and religious beliefs. Genocide involves the murder of children simply for the crime of being born who they are. We remember 1.5 million Jewish children killed in the Shoah, including my mother's first cousin, Zolman, and many other children who she never met, who were living in Ukraine and Lithuania while she was safe in London. I invite you to honor all those, both Jews and Gentiles, who at great risk to themselves and their families work to save others. Thousands of Jewish children and adults were saved by these selfless acts of compassion in the areas occupied by the Nazis. Many of the rescuers died for these actions. Some of us here today owe both our own and our children and grandchildren's lives to the actions of such courageous individuals. In their honor, I want to ask you to consider what you can do to help prevent another genocide that is happening today. The Hazara ethnic minority in Afghanistan have been victims of an ongoing genocide for the last 130 years. In the 1890s, 60% of their population were massacred in government-sponsored ethnic cleansing. This resembled the Turkish genocide of Armenians in World War I. This pattern has continued up to the present day, with frequent attacks on Hazara schools, mosques, and social centers. There have been 50 such incidents in the last 5 years. A local interfaith group are currently building a network to focus on the needs of the Hazara. Our aim is to raise awareness of the Hazara's situation and to help bring Hazara refugees to safety here in Canada. There will be a vigil at the Legislature building this Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. to remember over 50 young Hazara women killed in a suicide bombing of their high school in Kabul 6 weeks ago. I ask you to also keep them in your thoughts as we read the Kaddish together. If you want to learn more, I can be contacted through the Congregation Emanu-El Refugee Project. Please rise, and we will read responsively together. You're welcome to join in the Hebrew Kaddish if you are comfortable doing so. Yid Gadal, Yid Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, V'alma Divrei Kirutei, V'yimlach Malchutei, V'chayechon V'yomechon, V'chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael, V'agala V'zman Kari V'yimaru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevorach L'olam U'mea Yitbarach V'yishtapach Yitpa'ah V'yitomah V'yitnaseh V'yisadah V'yitaleh V'yitalah Shemed Kurishah V'yichu Leila Min kol brechata v'shirata Tush b'chata v'nechemata Yama, Yalma, Yimaru, Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemayim. V'chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael. Yimaru, Amen. Osei Shalom B'mromav. Hu Ya'asei Shalom. Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael. Amen. Amen. May the one who causes peace to reign in the high heavens let peace descend on us and on all Israel and all the world. And we say, Amen.
I began by trying to explain what I understood to be commemoration. I believe tonight we fulfilled that task. You've heard words of remembrance. You've heard beautiful music. You've seen a moving candlelight ceremony in memory of those who perished in the Shoah, and a powerful commitment from our community leaders to stand together against hate wherever found. This commemoration, as powerful as it may be, can not only be for this evening. It has to have meaning and action in every day in our personal, professional, family, and daily lives. There are big and small actions each of us can take every day as individuals, citizens of government, and members of society to give meaning to these words. I encourage you not to be bystanders in the face of hate. I think the greatest danger of the dark history of Kristallnacht and the Shoah that you've heard many times tonight is the indifference of suffering to others. No one, I think, has expressed it as well as the late Elie Wiesel in his 1986 Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, where he said, "I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." I want to close by remembering my parents, Muttal and Regina Mencher. They experienced terrible loss and dislocation, yet they provided a new life. They created a new life, providing me with strong ethical values by their words and actions. They also taught me that everyone needs to speak out and take action, wherever and whenever any person faces an attack or discrimination. On this evening of Kristallnacht Commemoration, we can do no greater honor to the memory of those who perished or suffered terribly in Kristallnacht and the Shoah than to publicly, visibly, and strongly speak out against racism and anti-Semitism and commit to act so that no peoples will have to stand alone together. Sorry, they will never have to stand alone when targeted by the hateful few. This is what we can do today. I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming this evening, seeing the synagogue full, and seeing such a representative group from the Victoria community here is really heartening. So I thank you. I thank all the participants tonight, and our beautiful musicians will play us out. Thank you.
Talk to you next time. Nice to see you.